Got me?
Yeah.
You still hear
I
me?
did lose you for a bit. You went
You there, Chris?
a bit fuzzy.
Okay. All right. So, but what's interesting is now, what we're seeing is, well, best practice is starting to come in. The physios, we're the physios of the judo national team. We're starting to see that, I think you've lost me again, green light. Okay. So we've started to see that people are getting the message, and we're able to take best practices across platforms, and we're starting to scale it into other systems. And I really do believe that a modern strength and conditioning system, most of the sports we play demand upright torso. And if you front squat, then you're teaching upright torso, and I quickly can tell if you have enough range of motion. Trying to get to the place where everyone can see that.
I lost you again there. Can you repeat from the upright torso bit?
Oh, just the issue is that we're seeing that most sports require an upright torso, right? And the upright torso demands are reflected well in something that looks like an overhead squat or a front squat. And not only do I have this great training stimulus, but I also have a quick diagnostic tool that red light, green light. Okay, there you are. You back, Chris?
Hello.
I'm here.
Right.
Okay.
Do you know if it's your end or my end?
I think it's your end. I can't tell. Who knows? It's the internet.
Nah. Okay, we'll roll with it. We'll see what
All right.
happens.
So what's happening is, a coach like Dan John says, hey, can you overhead squat your body weight? And what he knows is no one can just come in and overhead squat their body weight. And that being able to overhead squat is one of the best diagnostic tools for keeping your spine straight. Do you have full range of motion control in your shoulder? And do you have full sufficiency in your ankles and hips? And what we see very fast is that people can't even overhead squat a bar. Can't overhead squat with their hands up. And to be able to even overhead squat your body weight, you're probably going to have to do a lot of training to be able to get there. And so the diagnostic tool is also the stimulus. And at the same time, I can really start to, what we're finding and what we're trying to do is say, look, the physio is for the emergency. The physio is when you're stumped. What we want to do is make it so easy that the strength and conditioning teacher, the movement teacher, should be able to see these things. If your kids are walking with their feet out like ducks, you should be able to identify that that's not a good position and say, hey, hon, you need to walk with your feet straight. Why? Because humans walk with their feet straight, and what you're doing is the equivalent of rounding your back when you pick something up off the ground. Like, everyone understands that we shouldn't do that. So if we can get to the level where, in the 1970s, and this is a Gray Cook example, our gym teachers, our PE teachers, did a lot of screening for scoliosis. What we do is we would fold forward, and then the PE teacher would see if your spine went left or spine went right, right? They could tell if you had a scoliosis by bending over and touching your toes. And so here's a PE teacher who's not skilled in this, but can tell it's right or goes left, and makes a diagnosis or sends out the referral to the edging with the parent, with the coach.
Cool. Well, I think everything you're saying is very much aligned with proper movement, whether it's overhead squatting with a large weight or overhead squatting with a wooden piece of dowel rod, whatever
That's right.
it may be. And I think it's, in some ways, exercise, movement, performance can be that simple if we start from that foundation and we grow upwards, basically. Which then, I guess, sort of what we've been talking about with the whole diagnostic thing, I guess that then leads us on to, in some ways, where I begin a lot of my training, which is the low back pain side of it. Now, we know it can be a minefield. It needs to be specific. It has to be case specific. We can't just say back pain, this is the answer. But what we can do is we can...
I would disagree with you there a little bit.
Really? Yeah.
Well, and because, sure, I might have individual pathologies, and the pain generator clearly may be different for people.
Yeah.
But the movement pattern is the same.
Sure.
And so at some point we have to say, here are the similarities. Mm-hmm. We had a young physio in our clinic yesterday, and she's trained with us, and she's brilliant. And she was practicing her side-lying shear technique, which is a technique if you're not a physio, where we will put someone on the side and then we try to see how much play is between each vertebra at the level. And it's a great diagnostic tool for looking at hypermobility of the lumbar spine and potentially as a mechanism for spondy or all these other issues. But the person still has to get up off the table, off the toilet, and still tie their shoes. And what the stabilization strategies are the same. Yeah. The technique to be able to move up and down and stabilize your spine is the same. And what you're seeing is someone, unless they had a traumatic injury to that spot, ended up, basically folding the credit card in half too many times and became loose. So on the one hand, I'd say yes, absolutely. The generator, is it soft tissue? Is it is it fascia? Is the hip? But the bottom line is, do you have full range of motion around the primary engines around that? So let's say, do you have hip range of motion? Yes or no? We were just having this conversation about strongman. We just had the world champion Highland Games athlete in, right? And Matt Vincent, he just won the Highland Games 2 weeks ago in Scotland. And we were talking about the fact that many of the athletes who are competing lifting these very awkward objects off the ground don't even have the basic hip range of motion. So when they go to pick up anything, groceries, their kid, anything off the ground, they end up reversing their pelvis because the knee runs into the hip, and then it drags the spine with it. Yeah. And there's your mechanism for spinal injury. So at some point, of course, you're treating and doing this clearly the right way, but I think that we can demystify that for some people by saying, look, you've got to know how to move, yes or no, and can you keep your spine organized, yes or no? Here's the lowest example is that the bartenders, right? There's this place, maybe the listeners haven't ever been there, but there's a place called a pub. Right? And if you've ever gone to a pub, I don't know if you have, but there's often a bar at the bottom of the pub where you put your foot up. Well, the bartenders figured out that if we took the extension load out of the low back by adopting that sort of Captain Morgan pose with that foot up position, all of a sudden people drank longer. And that's because we're able to maintain a more neutral, braced spine. That spine doesn't ache after a while. You don't get the low back ache. You don't want to go home. And, what are we really talking about? So at some point, what we're seeing is that I can do all of these correlates and diagnostics. I still have to treat the tissue dysfunction, but we'll never get to the bottom of the tissue dysfunction if we don't have a cogent model, which includes pelvic floor and the diaphragm. And we just have to put more things into the room. But I completely agree with you that sure, it's specific, but there's this notion that we're all unique flowers, and we're not. It's your spine. And if your kid is sitting in her desk and she's got a flexed lumbar spine, what do you think is going to happen when she's 16? You're going to see the same pattern.
Yeah. And in some ways, you've just kind of answered the question, because I was going to continue on, and I was saying about the specifics, but and there are patterns. And when I was speaking to a chiropractor on the Pro Golf Tour, he's just been over in Valhalla, and he's been various other bits and places. And I sort of asked him the same question. I said, what is that common thread that you tend to see with people with back problems? And he would always say stiff hips, be it extension, flexion, internal, external rotation. And you can analyze it all you like with the specifics that to some degree will be there, but what we can see is that there are patterns, and if we can give, which is in some ways the purpose of this video, if we can start to give people the basic pattern that is being seen, then hopefully, as you're doing on Mobility World, we can start to share the basic patterns without giving people incorrect information, because we kind of know that the basic pattern of a stiff hip tends to be there if you've got back pain. And I think
that's right. That's exactly right. And I think, the issue is that it becomes difficult for people to sort of put all the correlates together, put all the tests together and make a picture. So, it's better to say for us, we're like, look, there's sort of, three things the hip does really. In squatting, right, it's one of our prime archetypes, whether your feet are together or wide. I'm in flexion, and I have to be able to create an external rotation torque to make, I screw my feet in the ground to create stability to the hip. I have to be able to extend the hip all the way. and like I'm running. So if I'm running and that hip gets pulled and I'm overextended, there's an overextension mechanism. If I'm stiff and my hip, I can't create the torque and my hips reverse as I squat, there's the problem because you're probably squatting 100 times a day, right? If I can't hip hinge, that's also a problem.